This is D, and Less Stress for Life. That's what's up. I visited recently two of America's grandest sites. One was atop Cedar Hill, which is located in the southeast quadrant of Washington, D.C. Atop Cedar Hill is an incredibly spectacular house. And this house was the residence of an even more incredibly spectacular human being. This human being was incredibly spectacular, not so much because he was orator of orators, not so much because he was ambassador to Haiti, not so much because he was U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia, but more than anything, I would say that he was incredibly spectacular because of what he was not. Frederick Douglass was not a slave, because slavery begins in the mind. Whatever you're talking about, slavery begins in the mind. Frederick Douglass, as a youngster, although he was born into this heinous institution of inhumanity, his grandmother kept him from that. He didn't even realize that he was a product with a white rapist father and a mother who was sold to a farm 12 miles away and had to secret herself away at the end of the day to see him ever so often. He only met her in the dark of night. Frederick Douglass, after his grandmother could no longer shield him from the inhumanity of slavery, had a conversion experience. And Frederick Douglass was one of the first individuals to make that quote, "One and God make a majority." But I imagine that this is something that Frederick Douglass had to remind himself of quite often, because as he looked and as he saw the inhumanity that was going on around him on a daily basis, he had to remember that God, although it didn't look like God was in control, was still in control. In fact, Frederick Douglass probably had to use that quote along with this quote, which is, "Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have the exact measure of the injustice and wrong which will be imposed on them." There was a slave breaker named Edward Covey. And Edward Covey was tasked out with breaking Frederick Douglass, because Frederick Douglass, once again, was not a slave. Because they had to make sure that slaves knew that they were slaves in their minds. And Frederick Douglass had made a determination that he would not quietly submit to this thing called slavery. After Frederick Douglass had been beaten for days, for weeks, for months, Edward Covey put his hands on Frederick Douglass for the very last time. And why was it the very last time? Because this day, Frederick Douglass determined that he was going to fight back. And Frederick Douglass fought back to the degree that he put a beat down on Edward Covey. And once again, Edward Covey never put his hands on Frederick Douglass again. I imagine at the end of that day, he thought another one of his quotes, "Without a struggle, there can be no progress." And Frederick Douglass made progress that day. But was it enough to make progress so that he could remain in that toxic environment and just not be beat? No, not at all. Frederick Douglass knew that there was something grander for him. He said, "I prayed for 20 years, but received no answer until I prayed with my legs. Frederick Douglass had a manifestation of his faith by movement, and he moved to freedom. But my brother, my sister, was it enough for Frederick Douglass to have his freedom? Hey, he had his wife up there in the North too. Frederick Douglass wasn't just fighting for the freedom of black folk. Frederick Douglass was fighting for the freedom of everybody. Listen to one other of his quotes. He said, "No man can put a chain about the ankle of his fellow man without at last finding the other end fastened about his own neck." He realized that freedom could only come about when everybody had equal rights. I told you about the one place that I went to. The second place I went to was Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester, New York. What is so special about Mount Hope Cemetery? Well, there's this plot. I want to say plot number 18. Who's buried at plot number 18? Frederick Douglass's body is there at Mount Hope Cemetery. But as I was standing there at his plot, and by the way, his second wife, Miss Pitts, was right beside him. Her gravestone, her grave marker, an incredible lady who ensured his legacy. As I stood there, all I could think of was some of his last words that he uttered, that he shared. It was just one word, but repeated and repeated, which was very symbolic of Frederick Douglass's life. And that one word was agitate. 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 My brother, my sister, find a cause that is for the betterment of society. Find a cause that's for the betterment of humanity. Find a cause that is truly worth your energy, and continue to allow the legacy of Frederick Douglass to live on through you. Agitate. 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 Like, subscribe, share, comment. Additionally, go to www.destressmethod.com for more resource information. That's all we got for now. This is D, and Less Stress for Life. That's what's up. Peace.